Welcome to the Drum History Podcast. I am your host, Bart Vanderzee, and today I'm joined by Jeff Stern of Stern Tanning Co. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this episode was recommended by Mr. Bill Ryder, who's a fan of the show, who sent in your info and was just telling me, hey, you should do an episode on tanning. So Jeff is, I'll say it up front, not a drummer, but he obviously has a lot of skill in tanning and making these, natural animal skin drum heads, which we're going to learn all about today. So let's maybe start with, as a non-drummer, how did you get into making drum heads?
Well, so my background is that I'm a CPA, and I started practicing in like 81. And then in 1990, I was bored with it. I worked for a national firm. And I approached my dad, who was a semi-retired, still had a tannery, working part-time in Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin. And I had worked there during the summers when I was a kid, and thought I would, I thought maybe we could get it going again, the big old tannery. So I approached him, and he was all excited, and he was, I think, like 75 or something when I approached him. And so then we started up, and we started building up the sheepskin business. And in 2001, I got a call from Mr. Polanski, who was the owner of United Rawhide, telling me that he was deciding to, he was either going to sell his business or sell his real estate separately, or try to do, or do both. And I said, well, whatever you decide, just let me know. And then later on, he called me and said, I've decided I'm going to sell the real estate because it's worth a lot. And I have some sheepskin equipment here. I know you're a sheepskin tannery. So, and at that time, I was buying up sheepskin equipment all over the country, because I never knew for sure what we'd be doing next. And I thought I would just keep accumulating some used equipment. And I usually found a spot for it in my factory. And then like a couple minutes later, we set something up, and I went down to look at the equipment, and then we got to talking, and things had fallen through for his other plans for parsing out the business. So he said, you want to buy the business? And I thought, well, it'll fit in. I don't have to do a lot to move it into my factory, since we already have all the water and all the, that type of stuff that you need to run a tannery and handle hides. So, that's how it started. And we got to talking, and I went down to see his place, and I bought the sheepskin equipment, and then I went further, and then I ended up buying his little business, which he had already sold off little parts of it and cutting dies and things like that to other customers. But the core of it, which I didn't need much. I took a fleshing machine and an unhairing machine from him, and then we got started.
Wow. So I want to interject here a little bit, and Jeff and I talked about this before. I'm going to read now a little bit more from rebeats.com, which is Rob Cook, the Chicago Drum Show, great author, just great friend of the show. He and I talk regularly about the United Rawhide Company of Chicago, because Rob, there's not a ton of info online, but Rob has a great blurb on his website about this classic drum company, which was the United Rawhide Company of Chicago. So let me read this, and then maybe we'll talk about your relationship with him and your acquiring of that and getting into the drum heads. To quote Rob Cook from rebeats.com, the last tannery to produce heads for the major American drum companies was the United Rawhide Company of Chicago, operated by Mr. Stephen Polanski. Polanski, a Czech immigrant, founded United Rawhide in 1951. As the American drum companies gave up their tanning operations in favor of mylar heads and purchasing finished skins, United Rawhide became the calfskin supplier to nearly all of the major players such as Gretsch, Ludwig, Slingerland, and Rogers. So that mylar head thing, as people listening to the show would know, was probably like 56, 57. But I think, you could still get calfskin heads for a while there. So the big four, Gretsch, Ludwig, Slingerland, and Rogers, were doing it. Eventually, Mr. Polanski became the only American producer of heads for orchestral drum outfits and timpani, outfits meaning drum sets. When he retired, he sold his business to Stern Tanning and trained Stern and his manufacturing process, which is obviously Jeff, who we're talking to right now. Stern produces skins mounted on wooden flesh hoops as well as unmounted skins. They produce snare drum heads, white or translucent, bass drum heads, timpani heads, tambourine heads, bongo and conga heads, taiko drum heads, and that's basically it for what Rob has on his website. So does that all sound correct to you, Jeff?
Yeah, Mr. Polanski's business was he did a little bit more than that. That was when we started out, we were really busy doing goatskin vellum for high-end furniture, for decorative and, like armoire doors, tabletops. So that was really an important part of his business in terms of the volume. So that's what we started out doing the most of, was the goatskin parchment. And then, then we started providing tambourine. We were doing more tambourine heads than Mr. Polanski was doing for a while.
Interesting.
With the goatskin also.
Can you explain, because I've actually heard it come up in multiple other episodes, what is vellum? And like, when you say parchment, like, are you talking about like paper? It's paper thin basically, or like, what is vellum?
Yeah, vellum it's basically interchangeable. So it's just the process skin of the hide. So I've looked into it, and I don't think that there's really anything significantly different between the two terms, vellum or parchment.
So it's just super, super thin. And I mean, when I think parchment, I think like writing on it. So like, are you writing on these super thin goatskin, parchments, vellum?
No, I mean, we do sell to some people that do calligraphy, and but really the thickness of that can be the same thickness as that we sell for our concert snare or tambourine heads.
Gotcha.
Or banjo heads.
Gotcha. Okay. So is then a drum head made, is that a vellum? Like, is that because it's so thin?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that the thickness really, differentiates between vellum versus rawhide.
Okay.
I think the vellum is a little more processed.
Got it.
And a cleaner, more precise kind of than when someone thinks of rawhide. It's a
yeah, and rawhide by nature, it just sounds more raw.
Yeah,
obviously.
Right. Right.
And that's just one of many, we'll call them, for me, stupid questions, because I know absolutely nothing about this process. All right, so that's cool. So you said you were making tambourine heads and all this stuff. Now, obviously, for going back a little bit for Mr. Polanski, that must have been, there's no way you can really know this unless he actually told you, but if he started United Rawhide in 1951, then once Mylar synthetic drum heads came in, he must have kind of just thought to himself, there goes my drum head portion of the business is in trouble, right?
Yeah, well, I'm sure that's the case. He had, lots of drum frames that were set up to do, so he could make the pre-mounted heads, pre-tucked heads.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure at the time when he was at the end, he was just doing, onesie-twosie type orders, as, a lot of it is what we do.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, I'm sure that was the case. And then the same thing happened to me in our sheepskin tanning business. So, when I started it up with my father, we built it up to the point where we were doing about 3,000 skins a week. And then the Chinese industry got involved and pretty much stopped all, paint roller production of lambskin in the U.S. So all the companies that we were selling to, so it was that same kind of thing that I experienced with lambskin paint rollers.
Oh, man. Well, it happens in every industry. I mean, there's so many parallels to drumming where, like, we always talk about on the show, where like silent movies, and then the drummers lost a bunch of jobs who were working in theaters, or oh no, here comes drum machines, now drummers lose their jobs. I think there's the ups and downs of any industry. So all right, well, maybe we can talk about now a little bit more about the process of how this works. And again, you live and breathe this stuff. I do not. I've got a calf skin head that's on an old, I believe, 20s or 30s Leedy bass drum kind of here behind me. But I know nothing about it.
Right. So when I started, Mr. Polanski was older at the time, and so I wasn't able to get a lot of details about the process. He wrote some notes, and we tried them, and we had to kind of fine tune things over the years to figure it out how to make a nicer product. I think a lot of it was there weren't like strict formulas that he gave me because everything was just kind of in his head. So we had to come up with kind of formulas that we could use. So, and then I had to figure out, the hardest part was the supply of skins had changed from when he was operating years ago when they were big to what I could get now. The distribution of the raw skin market, it's based on volume. It's harder for, small guys just to go somewhere and pick hides anymore. Like in the days of the Chicago stockyards, the drum companies that were making heads would go down there and pick out hides.
Yeah.
Well, those days are gone now. It's you have to buy quantity, larger than you may need, and you have to rely on the sort that you're getting. And so I had to figure out sources that would work for what we needed. So that took a while until I kind of narrowed that down, and that's changing all the time. I mean, the supply that I may have out of California, for instance, for small calf, that dried up, so I had to go somewhere else. And so it's always been an ongoing struggle with that. And the same thing with goat skin too. As the packing houses got busier and busier, the quality of the takeoff of the hide became an issue because there'd be butcher scores and marks and holes. So I had to really, try to get people to do sort that I need, if they were willing to do that, because we're a small user. So it's not like anyone's knocking on our door to sell us skins.
Yeah.
So it was just a relationship that they'd help me get what I would need, both in goat and calf, and I would do it. I was getting selections in everything. The big steer for taiko and Latin percussion, and so that's kind of how it took years to kind of develop that, and to figure out then, okay, I'm getting bigger calf skins than Mr. Polanski got. How do I make that work for what we need? And so I had to figure out different processes to thin the leather uniformly and make it so that it could be working for for what we needed for an end product.
Yeah.
So I ended up. So what we get from various collectors are what I try to get are pre-sorted hides, both goat and calf and steer, that work for what we need. And most everything comes in salt cured. So it's
what does that mean? Salt cured.
So the packing houses, after they do run the butchering operation, it's the hide business has become it's a big byproduct for them. So they make a lot of money on hides in good markets, for instance, and they have an operation where they'll lay the hides out, and some are established enough that they actually pre-flesh them on a machine, and if not, they just lay them out flat and put salt on them and pile them up, and then they get palletized and go to places like me or other big tanneries.
Does it draw them, I guess curing? I mean, is it drawing the moisture out inside of it?
Yeah, salt will draw the moisture out of the hide and cure it so that if it wasn't salted, it would just areas would rot. You'd have bad areas of the grain and things like that.
That makes sense. So carry on there. So you get them, salt cured, and then what happens after that?
So then we bring them in and we rehydrate them. And then we do an old process, and this is Mr. Polanski showed me this, and I've modified it a little bit since doing other things. I've kind of learned some things, but it's a very gentle process. So we'll soak them once they come in the door, and then we'll flesh them. They need to be fleshed clean in the raw condition so that the unhairing works properly. And then from the fleshing operation, we go into an unhairing, which is a very gentle process the way we do it. So we'll have it in lime and other chemicals for 4 or 5 days, letting it just very gently unhair. And it doesn't knock the hair out. We actually just it just loosens the follicle.
Interesting.
And then we have an unhairing machine then that I got from Mr. Polanski, and where you run it on there and it pulls. You try to pull the hair off with the machine, and then we also do hand scudding, which is really labor intensive. So we'll scud the hair side also to clean out the follicles and push any oils and grease out that we can. So that's a real labor intensive, and that is tough to do, and it's tough to find people willing to do that.
Yeah,
I mean that's an old operation that people have scudding blades in their hand and working over rounded barrel type things. And
so
playing the skin out.
The scudding, then, what is that actually? Because the unhairing, because at first I was like, unhairing, what's that mean? And then I was like, oh, to unhair, to take the hair out.
Yeah.
So what is the scudding actually doing? Is that removing you said it's removing even further and getting those things, those oils and all this stuff. So what happens if you don't do that? Does it just...
Well, then you'll end up with a vellum or rawhide that has, let's say it's a black and white Holstein. You'll see the black hair follicle in the hide. And, so we actually, for our concert bass, and now that we've developed the process for timpani, we scud those real carefully to try to make them, the appearance really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just the nice appearance, meaning it's just one solid, white or translucent, just like a nice clean.
Yeah. So it'll take the black follicles out. So it's a cleaner look.
Do you ever do it where you leave some of those the color, the actual, because sometimes people like that, your front bass drum head or something. I think DJ Fontana, I believe with Elvis, I think he had a furry. Yeah.
We'll do some Heron calf. We don't do a lot of it. We were selling it to a company that primarily sells in African drumming. So for that customer, we were doing Heron large calf, and that can also. And then once in a while I'll get orders for Heron bass drums. We don't do a lot of it, and I'm trying to. It gets harder to do things, and then just for real small orders.
Yeah.
And also the pressure we have is the price of these skins, the large skins, for instance, that I was selling to the African drumming or use for concert bass or timpani, or also I use them for in the drum kit because they're thicker.
Mm-hmm.
They're very expensive skins.
Sure.
They're like the top price per foot raw skin. Most of it goes to Italy for high-end garment leather.
Wow.
So, and the supply in the States is pretty low of that. There's not a great supply, so the price never really comes down, even in slow markets. So there's a lot of pressure for me to do Heron hides, and there's the African drumming market is a little bit tighter in terms of pricing. So sometimes it's tough for us to take a nice big skin and really make anything when we have to sell them at tighter prices just to compete with the African drumming pricing.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So, then back in the process, so the hair is off, we were scudding.
Then it goes into a lime solution that's in there for days. That's after the scudding is right after that and the unhairing. And then we go into the deliming where we have to basically get it back to its natural state. So we do that chemically and with water and lots of washing. So we go through a lot of water here.
Sure.
And then depending on what I'm doing, if I'm making translucent or white, the process changes a little bit at that point. But and then after it comes out of the water again, we flesh it a few more times. So there's a lot of fleshing going on because you want a real clean, backside, the flesh side, and a lot of washing.
So fleshing, how does that? You may have already explained it, but what is that fleshing?
So we use machine to do that, and in the old days they would do it by hand, and that's actually cleaning the flesh side of the skin. The one side is the grain side, That's where the hair is. And then the other side is the flesh side of the skin. So that has to be pristinely clean for the unhairing to work and for it to be a nice piece of vellum.
Gotcha. So what a drummer actually plays facing up, or a bass drum facing towards them, is the inside of the animal's flesh, correct?
No, they're playing on the grain side.
Got it. Because then you get a little bit, for brushes or whatever, you get a little bit of texture, right?
Well, the grain side is generally smoother than the flesh side, but if you play brushes, for instance, on the flesh side, it would really nap up. The flesh side is the suede side, of a piece of leather.
Yeah.
So that would really nap up and be problematic. So the grain side is the side they play on if they're playing brushes.
Okay.
Or most. I mean, there are some in orchestral that will play on a really finely sand flesh side, but for the most part, what we're doing, everything is, and even our orchestral, is everything is on the grain side.
Gotcha.
So you're hitting the side where the hair was.
Okay. Interesting. All right. So then how do we get from, so we have it's been defleshed, it's been it's in the lime, it's all that stuff. Where do we go from there to get closer to putting this thing on a drum?
Yeah, so then after all the washing and finish fleshing operations are done, then you tack out the hide, and we do that an old-fashioned way with boards and nails, the way Mr. Polanski did it. And so there's stretching going on, and it's usually a 2-man operation. And so we let it dry for a couple days, and at that point, then the guys do the untacking, and then I get involved in doing the sorting and grading, figuring out what skin is good for what, and what area of the skin.
Yeah.
So I'm there with a long neck micrometer checking.
Huh.
And then I lay out the hide, and do the cutting and take the various heads out that I can for what I know what works. And then I do finish sanding on a machine that I got from Mr. Polanski. And that's just old, kind of, you have to be really anal about it. And I'm there with a micrometer checking a hide as I go through it. I think I maybe do it more than was done when they were mass producing these, because I've seen old heads come in and they're not entirely uniform.
Yeah.
But I think what happened was, when I started out, I wanted to get make a really nice head for the orchestral market. So there's a timpanist at the Cleveland Orchestra, Tom Freer, who was kind of my sounding board, and also the guy who I would send samples to and find out what he thought, and he would kind of tell me what he liked. And he's pretty particular. So I tend to really try to sand things so they're really uniform.
Sure.
Within a thousandths or so of, if let's say our concert orchestral head is 8 thousandths thick, I'm right in that 7.5 to 8.5 range.
Wow.
On all the heads that we sand.
I mean,
I'm doing the sanding.
I like that you're doing a very specialized thing where you can just kind of feel it and use your tools and all this stuff. And I guess the end product that comes out uses your masterful eye and senses to make sure that the quality is key. Because I know typically with a lot of people who are buying these, it's not like, hey, my son has just bought his first drum set. Let's get him a full set of goatskin heads for his little Pearl Export $200 drum set. It's like, no, this is for very passionate, skilled drummers typically, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, at the price point of the drum heads, it's not something that beginners use.
No.
I mean, you may get young, orchestral students.
Sure.
That want to start out with that and do their, either auditions or get ready for grad school and have CAF to play on, because maybe their professor tells them that they should get some CAF or try it. So we get that, and our other market is probably, and that was a little bit new for me, is the drum kit drumming. I mean, we've been doing it for years, but I've got a better feel for the thicknesses that people like, and when a good customer was Stan at Pro Drum, And I was at the beginning when I started out with Stan. He was, no, this is too thin, right? Because I was kind of geared into the orchestral market, and I would send Stan then really nice heads that I thought were nice, and he said, no, we want something a little more meat on it. We want to hear some of that jungle sound, a little more, warmth. So he kind of pushed me into making a thicker calfskin head for drum kit playing, and with in that market, they're playing, and there's a lot of session players and being able to mic things so they can get the sound out of it. But so I've got a whole range of thicknesses that I know that generally I do for orchestral, jazz, drum kit. Some guys will make specific requests about how thick they like it. So I have all the ranges that I work in, and I've kind of got a good handle in terms of what everything is in terms of concert bass and feel drum and fife core and drum kit. So that's just something I've kind of learned over the years.
Yeah, a lot of feel, a lot of knowledge, a lot of built, a lot of experience gained. Now I want to ask you too. So in that blurb I read from Rob Cook's website before, it mentioned that you can either buy them, finished on a hoop drum heads, or you can buy them as kind of untucked. Can we maybe hop over and talk about that? I guess that would be kind of the final step there of putting it on a flesh hoop and getting it sent out. I don't really know much about that. Can you kind of just even down to what do you guys make the hoop, all this stuff, how the process of tucking works? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay. So the wooden flesh hoops we do not make. We buy those. I buy those unglued and unsanded. So what I do then is, depending on what size I need to make, I use the drum space. I lay out the drum. And I get spacers and C clamps, and I, put the wood flesh hoop. It's on it and bend it around, and it's bent when we get it. It's just not glued tight. Then I'll mark it after it's all set up on the drum with C clamps and spacers. Mark it, and then I glue it. And then we do sanding to clean it up after the glue dries, and then it's ready to go. Steel hoops we make mostly in house, but we only make them for really in the past 13 and 14 inch drum heads, and that's mostly for their orchestral market. They all want steel hoops on theirs.
Why would they prefer steel?
Well, wood hoops over time can flex in as you're tensioning it. So the steel is never going to, you'll never get any warping or flexing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's the difference. It's more expensive to do the steel.
Sure.
But the drum kit stuff is, a lot of what we do is the vintage, and that's, mostly old. That was all wood back in the day. So, and we're not set up to make steel for all the other sizes. So
gotcha.
We're kind of doing wood for all the and for the concert bass drum, and because we make everything from 10 inch or 8 inch to 40 inch.
Wow.
Finished heads.
So then, obviously, let's kind of cover maybe the actual process of doing because calfskin tucking, and I guess there would be on old drums there'd be tack. You'd tack it onto the drum. So I'm assuming, and I want to talk about the tucking, but I'm assuming if someone was going to do the tack heads on their own personal 1920s or whatever drum set, they would order the head not with a hoop. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot of people order cut rounds only, and they either like to do the tucking themselves, or they're drum and fife core guys, and they do all the tucking on their own. So so then I'll rehydrate the sanded head when it's finished, and the drum hoop is ready to go, and then I do the tucking. We did years ago for Drum Magazine, we did a 22-step pictorial, step-by-step kind of instruction of how to tuck a drum head.
Cool.
And I don't remember what year that was, but it's out there in Drum Magazine. And so that's just kind of an acquired skill that you get. I mean, it takes a while to get a hang of it. The guy, my manager who was doing it before, could do them really quickly. I'm a little slower, but it gets done, and I know how to get it done, and it looks nice. And then we put it on and dry it, and set the depth so that it's consistent between the top of the counter hoop and the top of the drum head. So we have and then it takes a couple days for it to dry, and then we take it off and then bag it and seal it, to avoid the effects of moisture while it's sitting around, and then it's ready to go.
Wow, yeah. So I pretty quickly just Googling it, and I'll include it in the show notes per usual. I found this, and it's pretty awesome. I mean, man, and there's a lot of little tools that you're using in this, like you said, it's like a 22-step pictorial guide.
Yeah.
And I mean, boy, it's just so interesting. And the head looks, in this particular picture that, again, go to the show notes and you can see it. It looks really thin. I guess that's a bottom head maybe that I'm looking at, which is probably thinner.
That's a batter head. That's probably a concert snare drum head he was tucking. There's one thing that I've added to make it a little bit easier for me. I'll actually, when I do the tucking, I'll fold the edge of the calf over the hoop and use clothespins and lock the fold in with clothespins, and then do the tucking. Remove the clothespin and then put the clothespin back on and go around and do the tucking that way. Same way he does it.
Yeah.
But it just keeps it centered easier, and you can push a little harder to push the calf through, and you don't have to worry about stressing one side from the other, because the clothespin kind of helps in both sides.
Sure.
So that's just something I've done to make it a little easier for me. My guy had learned from Polanski's guys, and he'd been doing it for he worked for me for 20 some years, so he was doing it from the get-go. But so I've been doing it the last 3 years.
Now, so you've got this drum head that you have been that you're starting the process of tucking. You've gotten it nice and hydrated, and you obviously, so it says here, you use a squeegee to remove the excess water. But so as you're doing the process, it's a little bit damp, I guess. But as the moisture is leaving the drum head, because it's skin, then it's tightening itself a little bit and locking in your tucking, right?
Well, during the tucking process, it's pretty quick, so the skin's plenty wet. You don't have to worry about that. Now, if you're tucking a translucent calf head, like let's say a snare side, the res side for a snare, that's very thin and they're very delicate, so we only soak those for 5 minutes. So they don't hold the moisture as much. So when I'm tucking, I may have, to do the res side, I may have a little dish of water there that I can sprinkle on at each, that I can add some moisture to the tuck as I'm going around it, because that head will end up getting a little stickier and drier and hard to tuck. So a little bit of water adding a little water to the edge makes it a little easier.
Got it. And then as it dries, when you're done, and you obviously want it to dry, then which leads into my next question here, is it's going to then tighten itself as skin does. I guess when it's, when it loses that moisture, it's going to start to tighten up.
Right.
I mean, it's 2021, but like, skin doesn't care if it's 100 years ago or if it's today. It's the same problems that you would run into. Obviously, we have more temperature controlled venues where maybe if you're playing a gig, you're going to be more in an air conditioning and you're not. It doesn't matter as much if it's raining outside, but people still with these heads have to deal with humidity issues and loosening and tightening, correct?
Yeah, nothing's changed from that. I mean, I remember being at one of the PACE conventions and watching, a band, and the drummer playing the drum kit had a spray bottle next to him. And I'd see him spraying in an air-conditioned lobby of a hotel, and I'd see him spraying give it a little moisture to his bass drum. The things you have to worry about are the real thin heads. They're going to react a little bit stronger and tighten more. So the things that the biggest risk is playing in humid conditions, and really, so you're cranking it up and then putting it in an air conditioned room without detuning at before you do that. That's the type of thing where, but people learn how they have to deal with it, if they're gigging with it or.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean,
So.
These, like you said, this is, you're usually pretty experienced, and this is specialized, to some degree. I know the head that I have that's on this old bass drum that I bought this bass drum at like a antique, like a flea market kind of thing, an outdoor thing. It was $35. And I'm pretty sure I've talked about it on the show before, but I saved it from being bought by an interior decorator who was going to like put it, I'm sure there's the old joke of like, put a piece of glass on it, boom, you got a table with anything.
Right, right.
Like anything and everything.
Sure, we tuck heads for that purpose.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. But I have it, and it's like it just in the middle of the, I don't know, I actually don't know if it's batter or, the reso head, but it is split. It's from being so old, and I'm sure it's just in someone's attic, and it's just been hot and cold and hot and cold, and it just split.
Right.
Am I mistaken? I think I saw somewhere online that you can actually repair a split head. Is that right?
I don't know if you can. I mean, sometimes I was told that people will take, if it's a tiny little split, that's one thing. A big split, you're not going to be able to.
Yeah, it's like exploded.
Right. So a tiny split, people will sometimes use barge cement and, a little patch of vellum, and then glue it to the flesh side.
Okay.
To try to cover that. Now, if it's a split along the bearing edge, that's tough. Then you're done.
Yeah, because that's where the tension is.
Right.
This episode is brought to you by Dream Cymbals. Dream Cymbals is launching the Tasting Tour 2021. There's going to be tons of cool cymbals, members of the Dream Team on site, and the recycling program will be in effect all day at these various awesome music stores around the country. September 4th, they'll be at Everything Musical in Columbus, Georgia. September 11th and 12th, they'll be at Epic Percussion in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. October 2nd, they'll be at Forks Drum Closet in Nashville. October 9th, Melody Music in Bloomington, Indiana. October 16th, Rhythm Traders at Portland, Oregon. And November 6th, they'll be at Rupp's Drums in Denver, Colorado. So go out and check it out if Dream will be in your town. So the big boys, the Remos and the Evans and all these things, they don't even go near this because I guess it's so time intensive. But, I'm sure they do make those heads that sort of recreate the feel of a calfskin head. I'm sure you're not really out there playing them too often, but have you heard anything about, I'm assuming it doesn't really come close to the real thing.
Yeah, I hear, and I've asked because I'm not a drummer. So, at the beginning I was like, well, I don't know if I can hear the difference. When I hear it now, I can hear the difference between the plastic and the calf.
Yeah.
But, others have told me, there's a percussionist at the Royal Opera House in London who said, I I asked him when I was visiting, why do you like calf? Because it just feels better to play on it. It's easier on my hands, and so, I didn't think of that when I was first starting this business, that it feels better. Most of the guys that just say they can't, the Mylar just doesn't replicate the sound that you can get out of calf.
Yeah.
And you can do things with, people tell me you can do things with calf. So for instance, on a bass drum, I've had guys tell me that they like it super low, play it where it's like squishy soft and loose. And in a Mylar head, it's either you got to tune it up or it's nothing.
Yeah.
In calf, apparently you can do different things. So you can play it tighter, you can play it looser, you can get different sounds, and it works, in different ways.
Sure. Now, so you said being over in London, and you talked about kind of the fashion industry in Italy before. Is America? Obviously there's cows and goats all over the place, but are we /you are we exporting skins and tanned hides a lot, or is this kind of people typically stick in their region that they order from?
No, I mean, in the States, there's very few tanneries left. So everything pretty much gets, for fine leather, might get exported to Italy. Like the kip calf skin that I buy. Kip skins are large calf. So I buy those and so I'm competing with the Italian tanneries. Most everything else here in the States is going to China for tanning. So the raw skins are, salt cured and palletized and shipped overseas. So there's very little production of raw hides going on. There's a couple big tanneries that do cowhide leather here in the States. But, a lot of it is, for the smaller hides, most of it goes overseas now.
Interesting. Okay. So let's say if I'm a drummer who really wants to experiment and maybe get a snare head or get into this, I know you've said that it can be, they're going to find out if they want to order. So how much does it typically cost per head? And then maybe we talk about, do people do a top head and a bottom head? Because even with let's say you buy Remo drum heads and you do your top and bottom of every drum, you're probably looking, you can spend with a bass drum head front and back, you can spend $300, $250 to do your whole drum set with Mylar, with synthetic drum heads. What is the price range typically on your heads?
So, for instance, for drum kit, and what we sell the most of are probably 14s and 16s. A 14-inch calf on wood is $80, and a 16-inch calf on wood is $95.
Okay.
And people do both top and bottoms. Most do just the tops, but we sell, and I'll make depending on what the drummer wants, I'll make a thinner one for the res side. I've had some studios order super thin res side for their kick drum on the res side. So it really varies, but you could spend hundreds of dollars outfitting a drum here.
Yeah, it sounds like if you have a 1920s trap kit and you want to make this thing as period correct as humanly possible, and you want calf everywhere, it sounds like you could spend you could get close to $1,000 if there's, depending on the amount of drums that you have, front, back, top, bottom, snares, Chinese tom-tom, whatever. So it's not something to take lightly, but if you want to have it period correct, and if you want to get into that world, it sounds like, but I think everyone understands from hearing you that this is not an easy process. This is a labor intensive process, and you're paying for your talent and your background and your skills and all that.
Yeah. And the other thing about calf is the heads last forever.
Okay.
We have customers that have had, I'll run into them at PASIC and they say, "Oh, I bought that head from you 13 years ago. I still love it." And, so I get, so this calfskin doesn't dimple, right?
Really?
So you can keep using it. Yeah. When you buy a calfskin for a kick, that's probably the last bass drum head you're going to buy for that drum.
Man.
So, there is that. The stuff lasts forever. So, and that's why you still see drum heads, you see, drums from the 40s with calf heads still floating around from the original ones.
Yeah. But like you said, you got to make sure that if you're going to store them or whatever, you need to detune it, obviously, so it doesn't get tighter and then looser and tighter. So would you just detune it all the way to make this kind of...
it's just, we have an instruction sheet that we give to people, but it's just detuning it a little bit. You don't want to do it so dramatically that you change the location of the bearing edge.
Okay.
So you want to keep it in that range, but it's just maybe a quarter turn or something like that, or a half turn.
I see.
Cover, if you're in a really dry condition, you want to just put a Mylar head over the top of it, or something to protect it. But it's not as much as as much work as you might think. But you do have to be cognizant of putting something in a really highly air conditioned area. That's going to change things.
I think sometimes stories and legends, and I guess tall tales you kind of hear, again, me hearing from my grandpa, it's like he made it sound like at some point to me that the head was just becoming so loose during the course of a gig that it's hanging off, it's like skin drooping, and I'm like, okay, now you're talking, it's like, I guess it's not that dramatic.
No, I'm sure if you're outside playing and you're at 70% humidity or something, you're gonna have problems. I'm just the calf isn't for everything, and that's why they graded mylar, right?
Sure. That's exactly, and we won't raise the question of who invented Mylar because that is a sticky subject for a lot of people. But all right, now as we're getting close to the end here, I would be interested to talk a little bit more, as much as you can. I know we've talked about it on some previous episodes a little bit about so tanning in the big picture, like many historical technologies, has a much bigger background and applications than drumming. So like medieval times, I mean, going back, I'm sure tanning goes back as far as man, sure. and when they figured it out, the biggest priority was probably not a drum head. It was probably creating clothing or anything like this. So I don't know. I mean, it's a pretty broad question, but maybe we can just talk about, as much as you can, the history of this stuff a little bit. And I think it has a connotation of being historically very like a tannery would be very smelly and involve like I guess you could say like brains, people say, and like excrement from animals to use the chemicals and urine and all this stuff. So I don't know, what you want to shine some light on all that?
Well, yeah, maybe many years ago, but things have changed now. The tanneries are pretty modernized.
Sure.
And it's not like we're super modern, but we have a wastewater treatment system. So we treat all of the wastewater that goes through the tannery has to be treated. Mm-hmm. We recycle, so we do chrome tanning on our other leathers that we make here in the sheepskin. And so we recycle and reuse the chrome. So there's very little and all the water is treated for chrome. So there's like no chemicals going out into the, so we're monitored and everything is really clean for the Milwaukee. So it's not like you envision, the old days. It's, chemicals. No big tanneries are doing brain tanning. All that kind of stuff is, done in small operations. So the tanneries now are pretty clean and the wastewater systems are pretty good, and, everything gets dried. Treated sludge gets, filtered and dried and, suitable for landfill. So it's just not, there's definitely odors. You can't avoid it because you're dealing with raw skins.
Yeah.
And the chemicals can kick off some odors too. Now, the chemicals that we use to unhair in a big operation, that chemical does smell like rotten eggs. It does stink. But we use so little of it because we use such a mild unhairing process. It's almost like using nothing. So we don't really have that strong of an odor anymore with what we do.
Gotcha. All right. So you said it, brain tanning, and I'm just, people like this stuff. We got to ask the gross question. What is it about like a animal's brain does that?
Yeah, it's the acidity you get from it. So that's in tanning leather. You need acid to pickle and cure the hide. So the acids from the brain will act as the acid that you use. So for instance, if I don't use brain tan, if I do tanning, we use formic acid and sulfuric acid, in barrels. So
makes sense.
Right. But guys that are doing the traditional brain tan, and that's really labor intensive because they have to do things to then manually soften the leather because it doesn't provide as soft of a leather as like a more modern chrome tan or alum tan does.
Yeah.
But it's just, there are people doing it, and it's a specialty, and it's still a desired market. There's a lot of demand for that. It's just at a small scale, and there are guys that are willing to do that kind of really hard physical work and do smaller volume.
Sure.
And make it.
Well, I just always find it fascinating that like, I'm referring to like medieval times, but I think most people who are kind of into the history stuff know that like, brains would obviously be one thing, but like the amount of things that people would use like urine for to make like gunpowder and use it as like cleaning agents. And I remember hearing that people would use it to like clean their teeth in the olden days, which, we obviously think it's disgusting and gross, but like you don't have these chemicals,
Right.
Well, Jeff, why don't we tell people here, if they're interested in this, a lot of listeners of the show are very diehard collectors, and they're probably customers of yours already. I'm sure some of them. But how do they go about ordering, a calfskin or goatskin drum head from you?
Yeah, so I've started making an online store, which I've never finished because I just haven't been able to have the time to make enough inventory to ever stock it.
Yeah.
So the best way to order from me now is still phone or email. You can find us online at sterntanning.com, and you can email me through the website. There's prices out there. I don't have an order form, so it's pretty much you get a hold of me. We can do PayPal or credit card, and so it's still a little old fashioned, but it works. And then I'll ask questions. For instance, things they should know ahead of time is for instance, if it's an old kit, let's say a 20s, 30s, or 40s kit, those heads may need oversized heads where the hoops are just a touch larger than the modern ones now, because that's how they made it, back in those times.
Yeah.
So like an old Gretsch kit may need an oversized hoop. We can do that, but I need to know. So the questions I may ask are whether or not a standard Mylar head fits your drum, or do you need to get something a little bit bigger? Is it too tight? And then I'll know that, so I can size the hoop a little bit larger when I set it up and glue it. Thicknesses of what you like, for instance, or the type of playing. If you're just a light jazz guy, then maybe you want a little thinner. Someone who plays heavier, we may go up to like a 14 thousandths in thickness for a batter head. So it's those kind of questions, and usually, so every time someone calls or emails me, I kind of go through that routine of asking those questions.
Yeah,
and then we figure out what they want.
Yeah, you bring up a very good point, and I believe we talked about it on the a Premier episode with Mike Ellis, Premier Drums. There's pre-international sizes where if you're buying a vintage kit, I think you kind of just raised a flag where, if you own a 1920s drum set, you probably know this, but make sure you measure, because they might be 1/2 inch sizes. They might be, 5/8 of an inch, 9 5/8 of an inch, instead of 10 inch, or 12 inches is 11 7/8. And I'm reading a Not So Modern Drummer kind of blurb about it real quick, just to kind of refresh my memory. But so, don't take for granted that you have a 12-inch tom and a 16-inch floor and a 20-inch kick. They're slightly different. So as Jeff was just saying, make sure you talk to them beforehand and kind of figure that out, because they didn't make it easy at first. Yeah. And as far as I understand too, some of that was, so back in the day, you have to order your Gretsch drum head for your Gretsch drums from a Gretsch dealer, or from a Gretsch themselves, or whoever who makes that particular 24.5-inch bass drum head, to kind of keep it all in their, keep it all in their side of buying things.
Yeah, and we've had people, we have a lot of people that send us drums because they have odd sizes. I need the drum to make, if I'm going to make a wood flesh hoop, I need the drum and hardware and everything to make the drum head. I need it for sizing, and I also need it to dry it. Because I just, sometimes people want to send me a flesh hoop that's an odd size. And one of the difficulties is I can't dry it then, because when a drum head dries, when it's not on a drum frame, it'll warp and potato chip from the drying process.
Interesting.
So, there are times when I've done things where I've actually taken the tucked head, dried the outer edge, sealed it in a plastic bag, and then overnight it to someone. And then they've got to be available to take it out of the bag right away, because you don't want it to mold, of course.
Yeah.
And then put it on their drum and dry it. So I've had situations where we've done that. More often than not, if it's a smaller bass to any size smaller tom, they'll actually just send me the drum. And then, we can make a complete thing there and send it back.
Wow.
So we do that also. And that's great. That's the difficult part in the odd size shape. We had, Mr. Polanski had more of those sizes, like a 25.5 and different variables. And I lost, my factory burned down in 2007.
Oh God.
And so a lot of the drum frames that I bought from Mr. Polanski, I lost all those in the fire.
Wow.
So when we started up again, I had to, I was on eBay. People were probably wondering why they're selling so many drum frames. I wasn't buying anything nice.
Yeah.
I was just buying, everything I could find that were 14-inch snare drums that were affordable for me when I started back up, and other, every sizes I could think of. All the way up to 40-inch concert bass drum I bought. So I had to restock all of those sizes after the fire. But what I wasn't able to do was restock the odd sizes that Polanski had collected over the years. The 25 and a half was a real common. 27 and a half was a real common bass drum.
And very rare, I'm sure, to find that equipment that he used, those sizes. That had to be. I'm sure they're just not around anymore.
Right. You once in a while you can maybe find one, but it's not like I sell a lot of those. So I'm not going to spend thousands of dollars to get a 27.5-inch bass drum. But those are the things that happen. So now it's made things a little bit tougher. So if someone has an odd size, it's the safest thing to do is to send me the drum.
Makes sense. And Mr. Polanski was obviously doing this in 1951. So for him, it would have just been, that's the way it is. There's a 27.5, there's a 25.5. This is stock, standard sizes, but that is clearly not the case anymore. So awesome. Right. Well, Jeff, I want to thank you for being on the show. I want to thank Bill Ryder for getting me your info back in November of 2020, which, that was right in the thick of it. So thanks for taking the time, Jeff. I think this is awesome. You've done you've held your own amongst drummers to be able to teach us all something that we do not know about. And hopefully you can get some customers out of it. Thank you for being here.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Bart.
If you like this podcast, find me on social media at Drum History, and please share, rate, and leave a review. And let me know topics that you would like to learn about in the future. Until next time, keep on learning.